Welcome to the Be Your Own Answer podcast, empowering good people like you to amplify your voice, your message, your movement. We believe that when 10,000 uncommon leaders step into high-level platforms, we will transform and heal communities across the planet. It's time to be your own answer. And now your host, Narissa Street.
Hi, welcome once again to 10,000 Women, 10,000 Stages, where we are working with you to amplify yourself as an uncommon leader. I am Narissa Street, and I am so grateful today that we have someone who has an amazing work history in helping tell some really compelling stories. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Marian Abrams. I did get the pronunciation correct?
No, you got it perfectly. I tell people rhymes with Aquarian or librarian.
Perfect. It is my pleasure to introduce you to this audience. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I have the unusual experience of being somebody who's in digital media but lives in the middle of nowhere, although maybe that's not that unusual anymore. I've lived for the last 20 years in a town in Vermont with 500 people. But I have a background. I have been supporting myself in the telling of stories in the digital space and video and audio since 1990, really.
Yes.
Okay, the first nonlinear.
Amazing. We're going to go ahead, please.
With some of the first nonlinear technology that was out there, like crazy big machines with knobs on them.
Right.
And because I have not spent most of my career in New York City, although I was there for a few years, I've had the opportunity to be free from being really in a niche. And so I've worked in a tremendous number of different roles in different kinds of production. And I think gives me, a really broad background that helps me understand in a holistic way.
I saw that. I was looking at your bio, and you've worked with a wide range of channels that have really different audiences, like PBS. I saw NBC, CBS, Spike, Oxygen. All very different channels with different audiences. And so I saw when you were saying freedom from a niche. That's fantastic. So tell us, the first thing you said is from the 90s, supporting yourself through storytelling. So how did you do that?
Yeah. So my first job, I actually went to film school. I spent a year and a half in film school in New York, and one of my teachers was doing a documentary on the Weavers, and I loved like all the Pete Seeger and that whole scene. I was really into that, and I had taken this guy's class because I was so excited about learning from him. And about a week into the class, he said, "I'm too busy. I can't teach the class. We're going to have someone." And so I went to him and I said, "I took this class because of you. Can I apprentice, intern, whatever? Can I work for you?" And he said, "We don't even really have time for an intern because we don't have time to teach someone. Wow. But my wife needs her checkbooks balanced for taxes. And if you want to do that, you can come sit in the edit room and do that while we're working. And, maybe we'll find something for you." And I'm not a math person at all, but I did that, and then I ended up working for them. And so that was my first job in the business, and we were working on the Hank Williams story at that point, which was a documentary on Hank Williams.
Wow. So I want everybody to hear that initiative is rewarded. So, and also take the job even if you don't think you're qualified for it.
Yeah. Right. And that led through, a couple of other jobs to what was kind of a turning point for me, which was 6 months on a frontline show about fatal child abuse. And it was an amazing show. It won a Columbia DuPont Award. We had illegally leaked documents. but it was a very high stress environment. And I decided after that it was time for me to get out of the city. And that's when kind of the whole journey of really finding, experimenting and finding different ways to work in storytelling started.
So was it so it sounds like, okay, we got to the end of, and I think people need to understand sometimes when you're telling a story and you're diving into a story that is that deep, because you were talking about child abuse, that could be traumatic too, even though the trauma was not yours. Right. So those of us who are working with people who are experiencing trauma know that you're going to experience something called secondary trauma. So that decision that you made to pull yourself out of something that was traumatizing you as telling the story was amazing. And it took a lot of guts, right? So you ended up in Vermont after that. What made you choose Vermont?
So that's a great question. I had some history here. I'd spent some time here, but I will say, I don't know if you've had this experience, but you land somewhere and you kind of breathe a sigh of relief. Mm-hmm. Felt like home. And I don't know if it was, I moved to, again, a very small town. At the beginning of your interview or pre-interview, I said to you, I'm not very good at being anything but myself.
Right.
So I moved to this very small town where most of the people knew each other, and people knew pretty quickly whether you were reliable or not.
Wow. Okay.
Judgments were really less on, what you were wearing or what your job was. It was, just a very practical kind of way of life. And I think I felt comfortable there. I was never great at, the hairdos and the, some other stuff. But I loved the fact that, like me or dislike me, there was not really room for artifice after a while. Once you live there for a while, people know the good and the bad. And even if you don't agree, they're going to, help you if your car's stuck or whatever. I found it really kind of refreshing.
So it's interesting, putting yourself in an environment that cares for you as much as you were able to contribute back to it, I think is what I'm hearing from you.
I really like the way you interpreted that, because I hadn't thought of it that way, but I did feel very protected there. And I also was able to be a really big contributor to the community.
How?
Boy, we're getting way off track from the digital stuff.
That's all right. We'll get back. Don't worry.
Yeah. So I had 2 kids, married and had 2 kids there. And when they were young, we were just looking for things to do and would walk. And there was a tiny library that was all volunteer, and it closed because there wasn't enough interest. Yeah. And so I ended up reopening the library and making it vibrant kind of community center where we had community activities, and it just became a gathering place for the town. And I ran that as a volunteer for almost 10 years. And then I was able to bring fiber optic service to the town.
Wow.
As well. So and also the town was severely damaged in Hurricane Irene. So we were cut off completely from the outside world in a town of 400 people. 10 houses were destroyed. All the roads in it were destroyed. Power's out. It's such a small town. It doesn't have its own police force or medical services.
Wow.
In hours, neighbors were rescuing each other. Neighbors were helping each other. And there was a town meeting with most of the town by the next morning. All the 2 general stores had emptied their freezers, and there was a giant barbecue on the green feeding the whole town. And so I made a documentary film about that experience as well.
So that's available somewhere.
It is. It's on YouTube now. It's called Floodbound.
Okay.
And it will, it's interesting. The drive for me was that at that time, and it's probably even more so now, I think at that time, I felt like if you watch the news, it was easy to feel like everybody was out for themselves. And the experience I had was that when it was obvious that people needed help, and there wasn't all the sort of politics of do they really need it and who's right and who's wrong. It just was your neighbor needs help. People stepped up and that people were good. And so that was the message that I really wanted to tell. I felt like that was important to get out there.
Wow. That's amazing, because what I'm hearing also is that there seemed to be a juxtaposition in the real felt experience that you had versus what you had experienced documenting that fatal child abuse case.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, totally different experience, right? And even in the work environment was a difficult work environment as well. Not just the story, but the crew that I was working with was dysfunctional.
Wow.
You have a great way of just like digging right in and finding the truth in a statement and really reiterating it.
I'm hoping to bring that to the audience, and I'm glad that you're open to being carried. So I'm hoping that people are also hearing, first of all, you just have a very candid, genuine way of just sharing yourself, which is great. You have a couple of resources that you share with us in doing that. So in the development of Floodbound and in the work that you've done, the fact that, I hope everybody heard this, you brought fiber optic to a town. I want people to hear that leadership doesn't just happen in your words, but it happens a lot in the actions. So what made you take that on?
I have this idea. I don't know. I know there's a term, enlightened self-interest, and I think historically it probably means something else, but it's something all those actions that I took, the library, making the film, bringing the fiber optic, were things that I felt I needed. And if I was going to work hard for me, I might as well work hard for the whole community, because I felt like I needed it. Even if they didn't realize they needed it, they did.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of women in leadership who do that. If they serve themselves, they're also serving others. Right?
Yeah, we interviewed, I think it was Sarah Green Carmichael, who used to run the Women in Business, or the HBR podcast, Women Who Work, something like that. And I remember she said that she referred to some studies that said women are great negotiators on the behalf of others. They're not great negotiators on behalf of themselves, but they're great negotiators on behalf of others.
Mm-hmm. That is the truth. It's work that my audience is working on right now as well. We're looking for someone with negotiation skills to interview next.
Oh, I might have somebody for you.
That would be great.
Somebody. Yeah. I might have to join your audience. It sounds like you guys are working on a lot of things I need to work on.
Yeah, we're getting there. So,
Hey, this is a great episode, right? Want to carry the insights from our show with you wherever you go? Visit myjoyisvaluable.com for the best resources we've gathered that are inspired by our expert guests. Find support for your business, tools to organize your life, and more. That's myjoyisvaluable.com.
So while you're with us, along with being an uncommon leader, right? Working in the digital space in Vermont, which I'm so glad that you're articulating that. I want people to understand that wherever it is that you are, if you're telling a compelling story, there is a need for you, right? And there's a way that you can be sustained. Not saying that you just landed there and everything just fell in your lap, right? But there is a way for you to be sustained, and you said husband and kids, and live a life, right? Yeah. So tell us now about how your work has evolved. There's so many resources that you yourself have created on the internet for other people. And then you're developing this thing called grounded content. So tell us a little bit about that and how your resources have evolved.
So I've been watching this kind of gradual movement with all of digital technology. Really, there's been this, people called it the democratizing of technology. Maybe there's other words for it. But as the technology has become more accessible and more affordable and also required kind of less technical skill, it's changed the way, there's been a gradual, constant change. It's not a sudden change. And so, probably 20 years ago, I don't even know the dates. I don't want to think about it. But when I started my first business, I was able to do so because the technology had reached a level of affordability that I could take out my first ever loan. I hadn't borrowed for a house or a car yet, but I took out my first ever loan and I bought an edit system. Wow. And at that point, I was able to attract clients from Boston and from the bigger cities in Vermont because I could provide good quality service at a lower cost.
Wow, okay.
That same trend in technology has continued. And so now, we're doing this interview. I don't know your background, but I'm guessing you now are producing a show and you probably don't have a background in television or film. But this technology, I could be wrong, but this technology has made it accessible. And so rather than rebel against that and say like, hey, I used to have this, this business and now it's gone. What I've said is, this is just the same trend that allowed me to get into this business on my own, continuing. And so what I'm really looking at now is how can I take the knowledge that I've gained over the last 30 plus years and use that to coach and train others to tell their own stories. So how can I teach people to be authentic? How can I give them just, help them not be intimidated by the technology, understand, I think what I bring to the table is that technology has been through so many changes in the time that I've been in this business. I mean, when I went to school for this, none of this stuff existed.
Right.
So I can see beyond the tools. And so I think I can help people in a way to see beyond the tools and to give them just some really simple advice about how to tell their stories, whether it's technology or whether it's just sort of from the heart.
I love that they see beyond the tools. We have a practice that we do where I talk with my clients and my students about resilience and looking at, how they approach things through certain vehicles. And then just not being attached to, as you're saying, see beyond the tools, not being attached to the vehicle that you're working through, but knowing that you have the resilience to work forward and accomplish whatever you've got. So I do have a tiny bit of experience in storytelling. But for me,
I can tell you know how to tell stories. That's obvious.
But for me, it's more along the creative and the content creation side. What I love about where we are right now is that the technology, as you say, the tools are now available. And I do still, take this wonderful, raw interview that we have, and I am going to pass it on to someone who is more skilled than I am in making it look like what I want it to look like. But I think we're also just, again, helping people understand that that's available. So talk a little bit about and I know that you're judging me right now, which is exciting. You have something called interview lessons. So talk to us about what your experience was that made you create something like that online.
So the reason is enough of these jobs, I never judge. I'm just enjoying it. I'm the ride. It's great. Although, I am impressed by you can just hone right in. So I had this experience where I think as a production person, I found I had a lot of clients that were, in marketing or communications, and they didn't understand that interviewing was a skill. So they would hire someone to operate a camera or to, manage the technology of the sound. but they didn't know how to get the answers that they wanted. And they didn't even realize that they didn't know how to do that. And what I realized when I looked at what I had been doing in my career, I mean, it was storytelling, but I have a deep curiosity and I love people. I mean, I love finding the innate sort of like value in a person and helping other people see it. And that's just who I am. That's not really what I do for a living. But I think that is related to interviewing. And I think that's why I love interviewing. And so when I looked at my career and I thought, okay, what are some of the skills that I've built over 30 years? And I realized that, not to toot my horn, but that I am good at So I'm really good at interviewing, from behind the camera and getting, not to make it, with authenticity, but getting people to say what I need them to say in the way that I need them to say it.
Right.
And so, when I started thinking about it, I realized there were different kinds of interviews, right? There's the testimonial, and that's when you want your client or your customer to talk about your product or your service, right? Then there's what I call the curiosity-driven interview. Mm-hmm. It's more of like you just really want to learn about something that you don't know about yet. There's the story-driven interview. And that's the one that's going to have a lot of the like, what happened next? Then what did you say? Then what did you do? Right. What did it look like? And you're helping someone who's experienced something, either as a participant or a witness, to tell their story. And then there's also a character-driven interview. And what I mean by that, I have a name for it, which is slipping my mind. I'm going to look at, I wrote it down. I pulled out my notes because I knew.
And for those of you listening, you as an interview guest, they should be doing what she does, which is she has all of her notes written.
So what I call that one is character-driven, but I call it conversational. And so the idea there is that the interviewer is a character. So you think about somebody like Joe Rogan or somebody like Howard Stern, right? I hear a lot the criticism, people criticize an interviewer and they're saying, why do they keep interrupting? It's not about them. Well, for some people, it is about them. Sometimes you're listening to the interview because you are interested in the personality of the interviewer. You want to hear their reactions. You care more about what they think than what their guest thinks. So that's what I call the kind of character-driven or conversational interview. And so I realized I was hearing a lot of people give criticism about interviews that I didn't feel was valid. And I was seeing a lot of people underestimate the value of practice and skill. And so I started breaking it down to these 5 different types of interview and then writing some articles with some of my experiences around that. And then finally, just a few months ago, I got the courage to come out from behind the camera and I've started making these videos.
I saw. For those of you, there will be a link attached to this interview, but you need to watch her videos. First of all, for the technical prowess of those videos. So I understand why people have hired you over and over again. The videos are perfect. But the sound, for those of you who know what ASMR is, the sound. I want this microphone. You could sell this microphone. This microphone needs to be.
And I want to tell you, it's not like a super expensive microphone.
But you know what? It's also what I'm sure of, because you have all of this experience. And again, please hear that she's saying that this is a skill. These things are practiced, right? So when we get in front of an audience, we should be practicing. Even if you know the work over and over and over again, you need to practice. You need to review it one more time. But the skill with which you spoke into that microphone, right? We can't rest on our laurels. We need to make sure that we are constantly sharpening the saw, right? So
yeah, and practice. I mean, especially if you have listeners that are anxious about being on camera or being in front of an audience, it is, one thing I've learned from being behind the camera is 100% a learned skill. There's no magic to it.
Yay. This is exciting. So, there are some things so this particular podcast is for people who are wanting to amplify themselves by also connecting with and creating more digital content. Interviewing people is an amazing way to gain access, like we're doing now, with the access to people whose knowledge is 10 times more than you. Like, so I do not have 30 years of experience with a varied, a wide variety of channels and production and just the alignments with people. Please just look her up. Please look Marian up, and just the wide variety of people that you've been able to work with. An interview is allowing you to sit at the feet of people who can give you the wisdom that you need to continue to expand your leadership. So in taking that, one of her amazing things.
This is a lot. This is a lot to live up to, by the way.
Well, one of the great websites that she has up is Interview Lessons. And on that, there are 11 interview questions that we should be asking. I'm not going to ask you all of them, but I am going to ask you some.
Uh-oh.
So, this one is wonderful. What's something people misunderstand about you? It's a great question.
It is a great one. I would say, and what's great is even though I wrote those and put them on my website, I haven't thought of the answer yet.
Yes.
Thought me up. I think what people misunderstand is that I know the technology only because it serves my creativity. So I think sometimes people think of me as kind of a techie person. I'm really not at heart. It's simply that I had, something I wanted to express, something I wanted to create, and I had to learn the technology to do that. And I think that as a personality, I can fall back on that because it's safer. And so I fall back on some of the tech and that kind of thing instead of talking about the bigger picture, the deeper thoughts, which are really what I'm more interested in. And so I think people misunderstand. I think sometimes people think I'm a techie. I'm really not.
So what are some of your deeper thoughts that you'd like to speak more on?
I just believe in, that's a tough one because they're everywhere, right? But I think what I said at the beginning, which is like, I love people and I believe in people and I believe in finding connections between people. And I believe in seeing beyond the tools and the technology and beyond the culture and beyond location and, finding patterns and similarities and helping other people see them. That's just who I am. Maybe that's like child of divorce or something, but that's who I am at heart.
So then would you say you're optimistic?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I've said after the flood, I said the fine line between optimism and denial. I try to walk that line. I try to stay in the optimistic side. I might be in the denial side every now and then.
Oh, if it's pragmatic optimism, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me a little bit about a time that you were about to give up, but you managed to keep going.
I ask this question all the time, especially because the big podcast that I produce, my primary client right now is Spartan, and it's all about resilience.
Yeah.
Set. And I ask this question all the time, and I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit on the answer. And I'm going to say, we interviewed this guy, Ray Zahab, and he's an adventurer. He does all kinds of crazy stuff going across the Arctic, and he does these educational programs where he streams live and works with students. And he said, I'm tired of always talking about the hard moment that I had to get over. He said, I want people to ask me, when you were in the Arctic, what was the brilliant, beautiful moment? So I'm going to tell you that story instead of telling you the time I was going to give up.
That's fine. So what is the story? What's the brilliant moment?
Oh, well, that's...
So you want to tell me that one instead?
I thought I was going to just get to tell you the story about Raise a Hab.
Yeah. So what's been one of your brilliant moments?
I have brilliant moments every day. Every day. You know, like we talk about the little dopamine hit that you get when, people talk about Facebook. If somebody likes your post, you get a little dopamine hit. Well, when I walk outside and I see the way the light hits a leaf, I get a little ping of dopamine. And when I look right now over at my dog sleeping on the couch, I get a little ping of dopamine. And, when I realize that I'm having this conversation with someone that I live in the middle of Vermont, right? And I live in a pretty homogenous culture. And I met somebody through Facebook, through She Podcasts, right? And we're connecting, and I'm having this conversation, and I'm getting introduced to your audience. I'm learning from you. This is like another big dopamine hit. So that every day I have hundreds of them.
That's a great way to look at things. So how would you say that sense of optimism and that sense of resilience and those dopamine hits, how are they now informing your approach to the digital space?
I think that's actually really helpful because it can feel pretty ugly out there, especially right now. There's so much conflict and outrage. And, there's a lot of learning that's happening.
Right.
A lot of good learning that's happening. People like me who have led in some ways shelter lives are learning. But I think there's also, it's just too easy to jump to outrage. And, you think about just talking about the mask issue, it's like my way of thinking is you look at the upside, you look at the downside.
Right.
The downside of wearing a mask. Well, maybe it's a little uncomfortable. What's the upside? Well, maybe you're saving somebody's life.
Right.
What's the downside of going without? Well, maybe you're killing someone. What's the downside of wearing it? Well, maybe your face is itchy or you feel funny, you feel silly, you're embarrassed.
Yeah.
So I like to look at it that way instead of saying like, what are those idiots doing? Why don't they mandate it? So I think having a big view when you look at the conversations and trying to, as much as you can, look at what's the context, where's the person coming from, what's their background knowledge. And, I don't want to even speak to the race issue because I feel like it's very complicated, but I will say that we did do an episode. I don't want to ignore it either. So I'll say we did an episode with a friend who I also met through the podcasting community, Kwame Christian, who runs the American Negotiation Institute. And he was enough to do an episode with our show about talking about race. And one of the things that he said was, if you want to make change, call someone in, don't call them out.
Right. So
call them into conversation, don't call them out. And we're talking about that now in this sort of big contentious political realm, but that applies if you're selling hamburgers or you're selling flowers or you're selling online services. If you look at your customers or your potential customers, and you always try to call them in and you try to understand where they're coming from and start there, I think that's how an optimistic kind of take on life can help you in the digital world.
Yeah. That's interesting because I think what's going on, a lot of what's going on is people feel like they need to show leadership with how loudly they approach things. And when you're approaching it from a space of really wanting to make some authentic change, then your strategy is a little different. So,
and I was hesitant to bring this up because I think, I'll just say it straight out that I think for the Black Lives Matter movement, when you have not been heard, we're right to speak a little louder. So right. I'm sort of saying it in that context, but in a general context, as an overall kind of strategy, I think the more we can try to understand, where different people are coming from and try to find common ground, the better off we are.
I think so. So I think looking at that as far as the movement from calling people in and finding some common ground, you can definitely find some alignments with what it is that we're doing. 10,000 Women, 10,000 Stages. We're doing our best to give people access to leadership in a way that fits them authentically, and creating communities based on that. I think is something that you're helping us do by giving us these skills and how to approach the podcasting and digital world. So I really appreciate it. So another question and just a couple more, and then we'll wrap up. So I know one of the people that you've had an opportunity to interview a lot of really, really solid podcasters. And I'm going to throw out a few names, and I want you to tell me what you think their interview style is. So, okay. So a big one, the one that's, I think, top of mind for most people as far as podcasting is concerned, is Tim Ferriss. What's his interview style?
So he's very much informational, right? So what I read about how he preps for interviews, and he said it's really all like this service journalism idea. So he listens to his interviews again and again, talk about practicing. He listens to, he'll write out questions, he'll listen to them again, he'll reread them, he'll ask others to look at them and review them for him and give them feedback. But it's really about, for him, it's really about speaking to his audience and giving them solid information. So for him, the mission isn't about his personality, and it's not really about the personality of his guest. It's what's the essential information that he can tease out in a very practical way and give to his audience. And I think, I talked about the 5 different interview styles, right. But beyond that, I think the most important thing is understanding what your goal is in each interview. So you have a point of view for your show, but you also have a goal for every interview. And so rather than saying, like, this person seems interesting, I want to talk to them, if you understand what your take is and what that essential thing is that your audience can take away from that interview, that you want to feed to your audience, if you know what that is going in, then you're constantly working to find your way towards that and kind of carve through the discussion. And so for Tim Ferriss, it's really about, getting practical takeaways, hacks, how to do this, how to shorten this, how to, make this more efficient.
So then maybe I'll reframe the way I was thinking of the question. Would you say then, instead of as an interviewer, you should have a style, then maybe not having a style that way, but for each interview, approaching it with a different take. So one interview could be conversational, one interview could be informative, if that's...
I think really the truth is it's like personality, right? You can do it however you choose to do it, as long as you know why you're doing it. It's like art, but I would say for most people, you're going to pick a kind of mission for your show. So if your mission is to inspire, it's one kind of a style. If your mission is to inform, it might be a little different. If your mission is to connect or introduce, it might be a little different. So understanding kind of why you're doing the interviews, that's your kind of overarching. But then once you get to each interview, so say you might say, okay, my mission is to, help women leaders be, have the tools they need to kind of step into leadership. I don't know if that's your goal, but something like that. And then you might say, I'm going to interview Marion. And what I really think my audience needs to know from her is, how they can be better interviewers. Or I think my audience really needs to know, like, what her journey was. Or I think my audience needs... So if you have underneath that goal that informs all of your questions, that sits underneath your overall mission of your podcast. Does that make sense?
It does. So what I'm hearing is the podcast or show or whatever it is that we're creating has, of course, an overarching, But for each particular episode, each particular pod, each particular piece of content that we're creating, we should be very targeted so that we can make sure that we're getting the best content from whoever it is who's in front of us. So, and that might mean a shift in style if that's necessary.
Yeah, and what that nugget is that you want to get from them, in some cases, if you're Tim Ferriss, it's going to be like, okay, what are the 5 steps to better sleep,
Mm-hmm.
But your Oprah, it's going to be like, how do I get a deeper understanding of this concept? So your thing that you're getting may not be, something you can check off the box. It might be the thing that my audience needs to get from this person is, how to understand this person that seems very different from us, or it doesn't matter what that goal is, but you just have to know what that is when you start the conversation.
Understood. Okay. So one last question for you. So, and it's one of your 11 questions, and I really feel that those are a really great resource to help uncover some of what you're talking about as far as the compelling story behind every person that you interview. This is a great question. What should I ask that I didn't know enough to ask?
You could ask me, that is a really good one.
It is.
But such good research. You know what? You could ask me after producing 500 episodes of Spartan Up, you could ask me what are the 1 or 2 kind of like biggest takeaways in resilience that I've learned.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to ask you that question. And then, so I'm asking you that question. So after producing 500, wow, that's amazing. After producing 500 episodes of Spartan Up and also 30 years, what are some takeaways on resilience? And I'm going to add to that, resilience and longevity. How are you still passionate about this work?
So, okay, I'll do the resilience one first.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest takeaway that I've gotten in the last couple of years from this whole journey is this concept of keeping your word to yourself. And I've found it to be really powerful. So I was always a person of my word. I felt it was really important to keep my word. And one of our guests put it in this new way. He said, it's really important you keep your word to yourself. And so this, I would have a conversation with myself, like tomorrow I might run 3 miles, or tomorrow I think I'll run 3 miles, whatever that was. And then the next day comes, I might do it or I might not. But when it becomes tomorrow, I will run 3 miles. And then when I'm faced with that, I don't feel like it. It's like, yeah, but you gave your word to yourself.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it has really made a change in what I've been able to accomplish. This idea of keeping my word to myself. And then the other one from that same, just from one of our guests, was this idea of I get to. And so when you swap, you've maybe heard this one, I see you smiling, this you swap out the word have to for I get. So I have to cook dinner for the kids. I get to cook dinner for the kids. How fortunate am I that I have food on the table? How fortunate am I that I have 2 kids? How fortunate am I that I have a kitchen to cook it in, that I have the time to do it? All of that. So I have to edit this podcast episode. Well, how lucky am I that so just switching those words from I have to I get to. And then I'll answer the last one, which was the energy and the resilience to have this longevity. I think there's no other career in the world that would have held my interest for this long. And it's because every day is different, like you said. From being at the start line of an Olympic ski race to sneaking, to being thrown out of a psychologist's office when we were doing the film on fatal child abuse, to being decks on a boat getting ready to sail on the Newport to Bermuda race, to visiting, Greek weavers in their stone homes in the Peloponnesian Islands. I've been able to see and do so many different things that it has kept me excited and interested.
Wow. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. There are a myriad of other questions I would love to ask you, that I do want to acknowledge your time. If you have things that you'd like to share in closing, feel free to share them. I there's so much to learn from you, and I'm very grateful for the time that you've given today. So feel free if you have something to share, please.
Well, I really enjoyed it, and I hope, like, I feel like I just talked about myself, and I'm not sure I gave some really concrete takeaways.
You're fine.
But go to my website, Mad Motion, go to my Instagram, Mad Motion, go to my YouTube channel, Mad Motion. But also find me on LinkedIn, Marian Abrams, and feel free to reach out if you have questions. If I haven't given you enough of a concrete answer and you have something you want to know, message me, connect with me there, and I'll do my best to answer it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Thank you for listening to the Be Your Own Answer podcast. Share this episode with someone who needs it. Find us at beyourownAnswer.com.